Can you fix my grandpa's radio before that man takes it away? Sophie asked, pointing at the dented military set between Ethan Cole's red-handled screwdriver and Marcus Vale's reaching hand. The radio crackled, its amber light trembling. Then a young soldier's voice broke through. Relay, this is Falcon 6. We have wounded. Across the aisle, General Thomas Whitaker dropped the commemorative coin he had been signing and turned sharply. Marcus pulled the power cord. Just a copied training reel, he said. 3 hours earlier, the fluorescent lights above Liberty Veterans Flea Market had flickered awake one row at a time, leaving the old aircraft hangar smelling of machine oil, cardboard, and burnt coffee. Ethan sat behind his narrow repair table with the sleeves of his brown canvas jacket rolled to his elbows, easing corrosion from a cassette player that had already taken him longer than the customer could afford. His metal toolbox rested beneath the table, one corner polished smooth from years of being carried by his father before him. Lily sat on a folding chair nearby, pencil moving across a math worksheet while the market filled with veterans, collectors, families, and men who spoke loudly whenever medals were within sight. Ethan first noticed Sophie because she was walking too carefully for a 10-year-old. Both arms were wrapped around a bulky olive-green radio, and an elderly man followed half a step behind her, clutching a faded veteran's cap against his chest. Every few feet, the girl stopped to make sure he was still there. Marcus Vale reached them before Ethan did. His silver donor pin gleamed against a dark blazer, and his voice carried the practiced gentleness of someone accustomed to being thanked. Mr. Hayes, we discussed this, he said. That unit is beyond restoration. $20 is more than fair, considering its condition. Walter's fingers tightened around his cap. It worked that night. Marcus lowered his voice without making it quieter. Some memories feel real even when they aren't. Sophie looked toward Ethan's table. Marcus followed her gaze and smiled. He repairs household electronics, sweetheart. This is military history. Ethan did not answer the insult. He watched Walter instead, the old man's eyes fixed not on Marcus, but on the radio's broken tuning glass, as though something behind it might disappear if he looked away. Sophie crossed the aisle and set the radio on Ethan's table with a dull metallic thud. Then she opened a small cookie tin and poured out quarters, dimes, and pennies. Can you fix my grandpa's radio? She asked. He says someone is still inside it. Ethan glanced at the coins, then at the frayed power cord and cracked Bakelite knobs. Did you save all this? Sophie nodded. Behind her, Walter whispered, She shouldn't have. Ethan swept the coins gently back into the tin. Then she keeps it. Marcus gave a restrained laugh. Kindness is admirable, Mr. Cole, but false hope is not. Ethan turned the radio so the damaged cord faced him. He smelled old dust, warm copper, and something sharper beneath it, the faint chemical scent of insulation recently disturbed. He did not open the case. He clipped a low-voltage test lead to the terminals, keeping one hand near the cutoff switch. I'm not promising it works, he said. I'm promising I won't decide it's worthless before I listen. The speaker gave one dry pop. Sophie grabbed Walter's sleeve. 3 measured knocks sounded through the static. Then came the voice that stopped General Whitaker across the aisle. Ethan killed the power the instant the mechanism inside began to drag. For 1 second, no one moved. Whitaker stared toward the table but did not claim the voice. He told his aide, very quietly, Write down every word. Marcus stepped between him and the radio, still smiling, and pulled the cord free as though preventing an accident. A common training recording, he said. Collectors hide them in old sets all the time. Ethan looked at the sealed back panel. No hinge, slot, or recording control was visible anywhere on the civilian casing. Marcus had named a reel before anyone knew one was inside. Daniel's warning still hung over the repair table. Ethan had until closing to document the radio, and after that, his booth could be suspended. Lily slid a white envelope across the scarred tabletop without interrupting him. The red print showed through the thin paper. Final notice, and Ethan covered it with his palm before Sophie could read it. Is that the electric bill? Lily asked softly. Ethan folded the envelope twice and tucked it beneath his father's old toolbox. "It's something I'll handle." 3 customers waited beside the aisle with a lamp, a turntable, and a kitchen mixer. Each repair meant groceries or another few dollars toward rent. Ethan looked at the clock above the market office, then turned his hand-painted cash repairs sign face down. The customers grumbled, but he wrote their names and phone numbers on separate slips, promised to call them, and cleared the workbench for Walter's radio. Sophie opened her cookie tin again. $13 in quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies trembled against the metal bottom. "I can pay now," she said. "I skipped dessert at school." Ethan stopped wiping the table. Walter lowered his head as if her words had exposed a failure he had tried to hide. Ethan did not tell the girl she should not have done it. He counted the coins carefully, placed everyone back inside, and snapped the lid shut. "Then this is still your money." Lily watched him for a moment, then divided the sandwich from her lunch bag into 2 uneven halves. She gave the larger one to Sophie. "You can have the good side," she said, pointing to where the cheese had not stuck to the wrapper. Marcus Vale observed from the neighboring appraisal counter, one hand resting against his polished display case. "A touching scene," he said, "but sentiment does not establish provenance." Ethan did not answer. He pulled on thin cotton gloves and placed the radio on a clean square of brown paper. Before touching a single screw, he photographed the front, back, sides, frayed cord, cracked dial, and every dent in the olive green casing. He set a ruler beside each mark and wrote the time beneath the images. Daniel stood nearby with his arms crossed. "You planning to repair it or put it on trial? Both require knowing what was there before someone touched it," Ethan said. He filled out an intake form in block letters, reading each sentence aloud so Walter did not have to pretend the small print was clear. He described the radio as property of Walter Hayes, not Marcus, not the flea market, and not himself. Then he slid the paper toward Walter and asked him to explain, in his own words, what permission he was giving. Walter looked at the radio for a long time. "You can examine it. You can make it safe. You cannot sell it." Ethan nodded. "That's what I'll write." Daniel's posture loosened slightly. He signed as witness. Ethan handed Walter a carbon copy and tucked the original into a clear plastic sleeve beneath the radio, where it could not quietly disappear into someone else's file. Marcus waited until Daniel stepped away to answer a call. Then he placed 5 crisp $100 bills beside Ethan's red-handled screwdriver. His voice remained low and courteous. "You have a daughter. I respect that. Write that the unit is beyond restoration and lacks historical value. $500 for an honest professional conclusion." Ethan looked at the money, then at the folded electric notice beneath his toolbox. For a second, Lily's pencil stopped moving. Ethan lifted the bills by one corner, walked them back to Marcus's display case, and set them beside a row of polished metals. "I haven't tested the truth yet." Marcus's smile thinned. "You think refusing help makes you honorable?" "No," Ethan said. "It keeps my answer from belonging to you." He returned to the radio without checking whether anyone had heard. With a soft brush, he cleared dust from the rear panel, moving slowly around the sealed seams. The casing smelled of old canvas, copper, and faint chemical solvent. One by one, he photographed the 4 rear screws. 3 carried the same dull olive paint, chipped and oxidized around the edges. The 4th looked almost identical until Ethan angled Lily's small desk lamp across it. Its paint reflected the light differently, smoother, newer, and brushed over a shallow crescent where a tool had slipped. Whitaker, still standing several yards away with his aide, saw Ethan stop. Marcus saw it too. "Routine restoration," Marcus said quickly. "Old equipment gets opened." Ethan had not accused anyone of opening it. He placed the screwdriver beside the mismatched screw but did not turn it. Then he enlarged the first photograph on his phone, the image taken before Marcus had approached the table. Around that 4th screw was a thin, unbroken line of gray dust. Someone had opened the radio recently, cleaned the screw, put it back, and left the rest of the panel untouched. Ethan's quiet kindness had done more than protect Walter's property. By documenting the radio before repairing it, he had preserved the first proof that someone else had already been inside. Ethan had not yet turned the mismatched screw when Marcus began building the explanation around it. "There's your mystery," he said, loud enough for Daniel and the nearby vendors to hear. "An unlicensed repairman finds a mark after handling the object himself." The words were calm, almost sympathetic, but they shifted every eye toward Ethan's gloved hands. Daniel stepped closer and asked him to stop work until the photographs could be reviewed. Ethan obeyed immediately. He laid the red-handled screwdriver flat on the brown paper, removed his gloves, and moved both hands away from the radio. Walter started to speak, but Marcus touched his shoulder as if steadying him. "You don't need to defend anyone, Mr. Hayes. This is exactly why vulnerable owners need professional protection." Walter's mouth closed. Sophie moved beside him and held the edge of his faded veteran's cap so it would not slip from his shaking fingers. Whitaker remained several yards away, his expression unreadable. He had heard a voice he thought he recognized, but a damaged recording, an old man's uncertain memory, and a suspicious screw were not enough to restore a military record. "Show us the first photograph," he said. His tone was not an order to believe Ethan. It was an order to slow down. Ethan opened the time-stamped image on his phone and placed it beneath Lily's desk lamp. The hard white light revealed the thin gray ring of dust around the fourth screw, intact when the radio had first touched his table. In the newer image, the dust remained undisturbed everywhere except along a narrow crescent beside the screw head. Marcus leaned in. "That proves someone serviced it. Old equipment. Gets opened all the time." "It does," Ethan said. "So why clean only one screw?" The question was quiet enough that Daniel stopped reaching for the radio. Ethan did not accuse Marcus or claim sabotage. He asked permission from Walter again, then used a clear evidence sleeve to cover the surrounding panel before loosening the screw 1/4 turn. Beneath it, the threads shone brighter than the oxidized metal around them. A sharp chemical smell rose from the opening, the same faint solvent Ethan had noticed earlier. The other 3 screws smelled only of dust and old oil. Marcus folded his arms. Modern rust treatment, probably applied during routine restoration. "Who restored it?" Whitaker asked. Marcus glanced at Walter. "Someone from the Hayes household, I imagine." Sophie looked up. "Grandpa doesn't have tools." It was not an accusation, only the plain certainty of a child who knew what sat in every kitchen drawer at home. Walter nodded slowly. "Never opened it." Daniel examined the intake photographs again, then permitted Ethan to continue under direct observation. Ethan turned the screw the rest of the way and lifted the rear panel without forcing it. Behind the civilian amplifier sat a narrow metal compartment that did not appear on the manufacturer's diagram clipped inside the casing. Its edges had been soldered into place decades earlier, but the tiny latch showed a fresh scrape. A paper label rested beneath a film of dust. "Falcon 6. Do not erase." Below it, someone had nearly scratched away the outline of a bird with spread wings. Walter stared at the faded mark. His lips moved before sound came. "For 72916. Then he blinked, looked at Sophie, and asked why everyone had gone silent. Whitaker's jaw tightened, but he did not step forward. "Coordinates can be remembered," he said, "or suggested." His doubt was fair and Ethan accepted it. He inspected the solder seams, the glue, and the oxidation beneath magnification. The compartment was old enough to belong to the radio, but the latch had been opened recently. Caught beneath its lower edge was a single blue fiber. Marcus answered before anyone asked. "No one has touched that recording box since it left the Hayes home." Ethan looked up slowly. He had called it only a compartment. Daniel had called it nothing at all. Even Whitaker had not known a recording box was hidden there. Marcus had just named what was inside before Ethan opened it. Marcus's mistake settled over the table more heavily than an accusation. He had called the hidden compartment a recording box before anyone had opened it, yet his expression remained composed, almost concerned. "A common term," he said. Anyone familiar with military radios would use it. Ethan did not challenge him. He lowered his eyes to the reel inside the narrow compartment and watched the brittle edge lift and settle with the faint movement of air from the market vents. One careless turn could tear it. "We don't play this through the radio," he said. Daniel frowned. "Then how do we know whether it contains anything?" Ethan opened his father's toolbox and removed an old cassette head wrapped in a yellowed shopcloth, 2 insulated leads, and a palm-sized voltage regulator. None of it looked impressive. Marcus gave a patient smile. "Mr. Cole, this is precisely when trained conservators should take over." "Then call one," Ethan said. "Until they arrive, the tape stays still." The crowd behind Daniel shifted. A folding chair scraped across the concrete. Walter stared at the label as though afraid even breathing near it might erase the words. Sophie slipped her hand into his and whispered, "He won't break it, Grandpa." Ethan heard her, but he made no promise he could not guarantee. He explained that the original mechanism was dragging and that an external playback head could read a few seconds without pulling the reel through damaged gears. Daniel asked how long he needed. 10 seconds of sound, Ethan said. "No more." Marcus stepped closer. "That kind of improvised test could destroy the provenance. Let me take the unit to a private lab and handle this correctly." Ethan looked at Walter, not Marcus. "Do you want the radio to leave this table?" Walter shook his head. "Then it doesn't." Marcus's pleasant expression tightened at the corners. "We should avoid making a public spectacle out of an elderly man's confusion." Ethan placed a blank consent line on the intake form and slid it toward Walter. "This isn't a spectacle. It's his decision." Daniel read the added sentence aloud, then signed beneath Walter as witness. Ethan built the reader slowly, clipping the regulator to a separate battery pack, so no current entered the radio's original circuits. He positioned the old cassette head a hair's width above the reel and used Lily's desk lamp to watch the tape edge. Whitaker remained at the far side of the table, one hand resting on a leather folder. "If you hear anything," he said, "do not interpret it for us." "I won't," Ethan answered. "The tape can speak for itself." He started the motor. A low hiss filled the small speaker, followed by a pulsing thump like blades beating unevenly through air. Then a younger Walter's voice emerged, thin but unmistakably steady. "Falcon 6, keep your beacon dark. The ridge is watching you." 3 church bells sounded somewhere behind him. A man near the aisle stopped dragging his chair. The whispers died so quickly that the hum of the fluorescent lights became clear. Whitaker's hand flattened slowly over the leather folder. "Again," he said. Ethan saw the tape curl at one edge and shut the reader off. The counter clicked to exactly 10 seconds. Whitaker looked at him. "There may have been more." "There will be," Ethan said, "if we don't ruin it trying to hear it all now." Sophie's shoulders lowered for the first time that afternoon. Walter closed his eyes, not smiling, only breathing as if a weight had shifted by 1 inch. Marcus recovered first. "A partial voice and church bells prove nothing. We should follow procedure and move this discussion somewhere private before people misunderstand what they heard." Whitaker did not answer him. He opened the leather folder, wrote down the phrase about the dark beacon, then leaned toward his aide. "Preserve the original market footage. Contact the archive. I want mission maps, flight logs, and any church within range of the listed coordinates." His voice remained controlled, but he no longer looked at Ethan as a repairman who had wandered into military history. He looked at him as the one person in the room who had chosen evidence over applause. Ethan began photographing the reel's cut edge when the black glass of the radio dial reflected a pale rectangle behind him. Marcus was sending a message beneath the counter. For less than a second, the words appeared backward in the reflection. They found the first reel. Ethan kept his face still and continued documenting the tape. The proof they had just heard was not the whole recording. Somewhere, someone was still holding the rest. The message reflected in the radio dial, "They found the first reel," was still in Ethan's mind when Whitaker's aide returned with a thin stack of scanned records from the military archive. The printer at the market office kept feeding out pages until one sheet stopped halfway, its bottom edge trembling in the rollers. Daniel pulled it free and laid it beside the radio. The Falcon 6 mission report listed the damaged aircraft, the wounded crew, and the emergency extraction window. But where the relay operator's name should have appeared, the typeface changed. The letters sat darker, sharper, and slightly higher than the rest of the page. Ethan did not touch it. Was this page created with the original report? He asked. Whitaker's aide shook his head. The archive notes a replacement filed 6 months after the mission. Marcus slipped his phone into his jacket. Administrative corrections were common. Old records were messy. Whitaker studied the page without looking at Walter. Belief had begun to enter the room, but he treated it like a dangerous current, something that needed grounding before anyone touched it. His aide placed a second record beside the first, a radio service log stamped 2 days before the replacement page had been filed. The repair location bore the name Vale Communications, the shop once owned by Marcus's father. Marcus loosened his tie by less than an inch. My father repaired hundreds of surplus units. That proves nothing about me. It proves the radio was there, Ethan said. He kept his voice level. Nothing more yet. Sophie tugged softly at Walter's sleeve. Grandpa said there was a box by the family picture. She had not searched a warehouse or followed an adult. She had remembered an ordinary instruction from home. Walter looked frightened by the attention, then nodded. The drawer, beside Ruth. A veterans advocate drove Sophie and Walter's neighbor to retrieve it while the others waited. 20 minutes later, a dented cardboard box arrived smelling of cedar and old paper. Inside lay a faded photograph of Walter standing beside the same radio, a repair receipt from Vale Communications, and a small brass key on a cardboard tag marked B17. The receipt matched the service log date. Across the bottom, one handwritten line had been cut off by a fold, leaving only the word secondary spool secured. Marcus reached toward it. Ethan slid a clear evidence sleeve over the receipt before his fingers arrived. No one handles the original now. Marcus's hand remained suspended for a moment, then lowered. You are turning ordinary paperwork into theater. A phone rang behind Daniel's desk. The market manager answered, listened, and slowly sat down. A report had been filed that morning expressing concern about Walter's memory and Sophie's safety. The caller had described the radio dispute, Walter's confusion over dates, and an unstable home environment. Marcus adopted the expression of a man burdened by responsibility. I was worried about the child. That should not be twisted into something sinister. Sophie's face went pale. Walter tried to stand, struck the table with his knee, and whispered, They can't take her. Ethan moved between Walter and the growing crowd, not to hide him, but to give him room to breathe. He could have held up the receipt, accused Marcus publicly, and let anger decide the next 10 minutes. Instead, he called the elder law number printed on the Veterans Advocate's card. He asked for an independent capacity assessment, a temporary family support plan, and someone who could explain Walter's rights before any interview. Don't promise me she stays, Walter said, his voice breaking. Ethan crouched so the older man did not have to look up at him. I won't promise what I can't control. I will make sure no one decides for you in a hallway. Whitaker heard that. The pity left his face. What replaced it was respect sharpened by evidence. He ordered his aide to verify the receipt, the altered report, and every access record connected to B17. He did not ask anyone to suppress the welfare review. He asked that it be independent and documented. Marcus dabbed his forehead with a folded handkerchief. This has gone far enough. General, perhaps we should discuss the military records privately. Whitaker's gaze remained on the key. Not while the civilian evidence is still on the table. Daniel accessed the market storage log. Marcus had claimed B17 had been in use for years, yet the brass key carried a fresh inventory sticker dated 3 months earlier. Then the security footage loaded. At 5:42 that morning, nearly 2 hours before Sophie arrived, Marcus appeared on camera unlocking B17 and carrying out a sealed speaker cabinet large enough to hide a reel. No one spoke when the image froze on his face. The radio, the altered report, the receipt, the welfare complaint, and the storage key no longer looked like separate accidents. They formed a pattern heavy enough that no closed-door conversation could contain it. By noon, Daniel had cleared the appraisal table at Liberty Veterans Flea Market and placed 6 chairs beneath the memorial stage, the same table where Walter's radio had been priced at $20. The overhead lights hummed against the hangar roof. Veterans, vendors, and families formed a quiet semicircle behind a taped line on the concrete. Ethan arrived carrying his father's toolbox in one hand and the sealed radio in the other. His brown canvas jacket was creased from a night without sleep. Lily walked beside him, holding the clear sleeve containing Walter's intake form. Ethan did not look like a man entering a victory. He looked like a repairman who had decided not to leave a damaged thing unattended. Walter sat with Sophie between him and an elder law advocate. The girl held his veteran's cap in her lap and kept one hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers. Whitaker stood near the memorial stage with his aide, close enough to intervene but far enough to let the evidence speak first. Marcus entered last, accompanied by an attorney, carrying a leather portfolio. His blazer was immaculate. His expression carried patient disappointment rather than fear. "Before reputations are destroyed," Marcus began, "we should remember what we actually know. Mr. Hayes has acknowledged memory difficulties. Mr. Cole operates a struggling repair booth and gained considerable attention after this radio was discovered. And the security footage shows only that I entered a storage unit I was authorized to access." Several people nodded. The explanation was uncomfortable because parts of it were true. Marcus placed a photograph on the table showing Ethan accepting folded bills from an elderly veteran weeks earlier. "This is not the first time Mr. Cole has profited from a sentimental story." A murmur passed through the crowd. Ethan did not reach for the photograph. For a moment, Marcus seemed to have taken control again. Then a gray-haired man near the taped line raised his hand. Daniel allowed him forward. He placed a receipt beside the photograph. "That was my money," the man said. "He bought a replacement motor for my wife's record player. I paid him back for the part. He refused labor because she was in hospice." Ethan lowered his eyes, more uncomfortable with the praise than the accusation. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about whether someone tried to bury the same truth twice." Daniel began the evidence review in order. First came the radio, the object Sophie had carried across the aisle, its olive casing dented, its amber light now dark. Ethan showed the intake photographs and the mismatched screw, proving the rear panel had been opened before he touched it. Next came the time-stamped footage from 5:42 that morning, showing Marcus entering B-17 and removing the sealed speaker cabinet. Marcus's attorney stood. "Mr. Vale manages historic inventory. Moving an item is not misconduct." Marcus nodded gravely. "The cabinet was damaged. I removed it for disposal." For the second time, the explanation seemed possible. Then Whitaker's aide placed a rental invoice on the table. It showed Marcus had signed for a handheld degausser the previous afternoon, along with an attachment designed for analog magnetic tape. Marcus's jaw tightened. It was for clearing obsolete security cards. Ethan turned the invoice toward Daniel. "Then why rent the real attachment?" The room went still enough for the air conditioning ducts to rattle above them. Daniel added the storage transfer sheet. The speaker cabinet had been moved from B-17 less than an hour after Marcus rented the degausser. The serial number matched the cabinet visible in the footage. Marcus changed direction. He accused Ethan of constructing a dramatic theory from ordinary maintenance records. He said the 10-second recording could have been planted and Walter's coordinates could have been rehearsed. Whitaker did not defend Walter. He asked the archive specialist whether the hidden compartment was original. The specialist confirmed that the solder, adhesive, oxidation, and paper label were consistent with the radio's wartime service period. Still, Whitaker remained standing with both hands behind his back. "That proves the compartment is old," he said. "It does not yet prove who spoke, who altered the record, or who removed the missing section." Walter flinched, but Ethan did not use the moment to force belief. He kept Walter's capacity assessment sealed, refusing Marcus's request to read it aloud. His medical details are not evidence for public entertainment, Ethan said. He understood the radio was his, and he understood the permission he gave me. That is all this table needs. Sophie leaned toward Walter and pointed at the speaker cabinet now resting beneath a white evidence cloth. That's the box from the video, she whispered. Daniel lifted the cloth. Ethan opened the cabinet under the specialist's supervision. Inside were scorched foam, crumpled foil, and an empty cavity precisely wide enough to hold a small reel. Marcus exhaled through his nose. As I said, damaged trash. There is no second recording. It appeared, for one cold second, that he was right. Then Ethan touched the back of the speaker magnet and felt a faint ridge beneath the manufacturer's paper seal. The seal had been cut and pressed down again. He looked at Whitaker, then at Walter. The compartment isn't empty, he said. Daniel dimmed the stage. Lights as the specialist brought over a blade, a camera, and an evidence tray. Every face turned toward the speaker, while Ethan positioned his red-handled screwdriver beneath the resealed plate. One careful turn away from whatever Marcus had believed no one would ever hear. The paper seal lifted beneath Ethan's red-handled screwdriver, and the speaker magnet came free with a low metallic click. Behind it, wedged inside the narrow magnetic housing, was a small steel reel wrapped in crumpled foil. No one in the market moved. The archive specialist photographed it where it lay, then transferred it to the evidence tray with padded forceps. Around the reel's metal core was a strip of folded paper no wider than a finger. When the specialist eased it open, faded military typing appeared beneath a brown water stain. A flight manifest, listing the Falcon 6 crew, the emergency coordinates Walter had spoken, and the name W. Hayes beside the relay confirmation line. Marcus's attorney leaned toward him, but Marcus did not turn. His right hand had closed around the edge of the table so tightly that the skin across his knuckles shone. A document hidden in a speaker proves only that someone put it there, he said. His voice was still controlled, but the last word came out dry. Ethan did not answer. He watched the specialist compare the cut edge of the newly recovered tape with the reel from the radio. Under magnification, the diagonal splice marks aligned. A tiny crescent of missing oxide continued cleanly from one reel to the other. The specialist looked toward Daniel. These were one recording. Whitaker's aide connected the restored segment to an isolated playback deck. The first seconds arrived broken and warbling, damaged where the degausser had passed closest. Rotor blades beat unevenly through static. Someone coughed near the memorial stage, then covered his mouth as though the sound itself had become disrespectful. Ethan stood beside Walter rather than near the machine. Sophie held her grandfather's cap against her chest. Lily reached for Ethan's hand, and he let her take two of his fingers without looking away from the reel. The recording cleared. A young voice, strained by pain and distance, came through the speaker. Relay, if I don't make it, tell my mother I heard the church bells. 3 bells sounded faintly behind the transmission, the same uneven pattern captured on the first reel. Walter's younger voice answered, steady despite the gunfire buried in the static. Tell her yourself, Lieutenant. I'm bringing you home. Whitaker's shoulders dropped as if a weight he had carried for half a century had finally found the floor. He stepped toward the speaker, removed his cap, and placed it against his chest. That's my voice, he said. Then he turned toward Walter. The general's eyes were wet, but his words did not tremble. And that is the man who kept us alive after command stopped answering. The room did not erupt. It went silent. The empty reel continued turning with a soft mechanical whisper. A loose sheet from Marcus's portfolio slid to the concrete. His pen struck the floor and rolled beneath the appraisal table, the same table where Walter's life had been reduced to $20. Daniel picked up the valuation form. He looked at Walter's uncertain signature, Sophie's rejected witness line, and the timestamp that had been used to make the transaction appear settled before the market had opened. Then he tore the form once slowly down the center. The sale is void, he said. Mr. Vale's market credentials are suspended effective immediately. The storage unit, transaction records, security footage, and all related inventory will be sealed for investigators. Marcus looked toward Whitaker as if rank might still offer him a private exit. "General, this can be handled discreetly. A misunderstanding does not require public destruction." Whitaker did not raise his voice. "You attempted to erase evidence connected to a military rescue, manipulated an elderly owner's consent, and used a child welfare complaint while seeking control of his property. Discretion is no longer yours to request." Daniel instructed security to preserve every camera file and notified the state investigator responsible for fraudulent military artifacts and elder exploitation. The elder law advocate confirmed that Walter's property and decision-making rights would remain protected during the inquiry. No one touched Marcus. No one shouted at him. The evidence had removed every place he might hide. Walter remained seated. He looked smaller beneath the memorial lights, not triumphant, only exhausted. Whitaker crossed the distance between them and saluted. Chairs scraped backward as veterans throughout the hangar rose one by one. Ethan stayed where he was, breathing slowly, his hand inside Lily's. He did not smile at Marcus or look toward the cameras. He placed the screwdriver beside his father's toolbox and said, "Truth doesn't need us to make it louder. It needs us not to damage it." Sophie let out a breath and rested her head against Walter's shoulder. The first movement in the room came from Walter himself. He lifted his eyes to Whitaker and asked, "Will fixing my name keep them from taking Sophie?" The question broke the victory open and revealed the wound still beneath it. The recording had restored the truth, but Ethan now had to decide what recognition meant if it could not protect the people who had trusted him before anyone believed them. The crowd at Liberty Veterans Flea Market did not leave all at once. People folded chairs without speaking, returned caps to their heads, and stepped around the torn $20 valuation form lying beneath the appraisal table. Marcus Vale was escorted to Daniel's office while investigators sealed B-17, copied the security footage, and collected the DeGausser invoice, storage records, and both reels. No one shouted after him. The silence following him down the aisle was heavier than anger. Walter remained seated beneath the memorial stage with Sophie beside him. The elder law advocate explained that the child welfare report would be reviewed independently and that no one could remove Sophie simply because her grandfather had memory lapses. Over the following days, Walter completed a capacity evaluation with a physician who had no connection to the market, Marcus, or the military. The report did not pretend he was untouched by age. Some mornings, dates slipped away from him. Some names arrived late. But he understood where Sophie lived, what she needed, what property belonged to him, and what choices he was making. A written support plan was established with their neighbor, a veterans caseworker, and an emergency contact Sophie could call. The adults built the safety around her. No one asked the 10-year-old to hold the family together. When Ethan told her the decision, she did not cheer. She only leaned against Walter and asked, "So I still get to make his oatmeal wrong?" Walter smiled for the first time since the radio had spoken. "Too much water," he said. Every time. The military review took longer. The original mission log, the altered page, the service receipt, the flight manifest, and the restored recording passed through archivists, attorneys, and officers who had never stood inside the flea market. Weeks later, the record was formally corrected. Walter Hayes was named as the relay operator whose instructions brought Falcon 6 through the ridge and kept Whitaker's wounded unit alive. At the public recognition ceremony, Whitaker did not describe Walter as a forgotten old man rescued by a general. He described the coordinates Walter held under fire, the beacon instructions he gave, and the 6 minutes removed from the official record. Then he faced Walter and said, "I believed the file because it was easier than questioning the absence." Walter accepted the apology without softening its weight. Then help question the next one. Daniel returned to the appraisal table after the ceremony and placed a new policy beside the repaired radio. Transactions involving elderly owners would require plain language copies, an independent witness, a cooling-off period, and the right to cancel. He apologized to Walter in front of the same vendors who had watched him be dismissed. Walter did not ask Daniel to kneel, resign, or suffer public humiliation. He asked him to teach every new market employee why a signature was not always the same as informed consent. Marcus's case moved through the system, His market license remained revoked, the disputed collection was audited, and investigators pursued charges related to fraudulent provenance, attempted destruction of evidence, and exploitation of an older adult. Ethan gave one statement, turned over every photograph, and refused television interviews that wanted him to call Marcus a monster. "Evidence is enough," he told Lily. "We don't need to become cruel to prove he was wrong." Whitaker later offered Ethan a large personal check. Ethan returned it and signed. Instead, he accepted a transparent service contract from the Veterans Museum to restore family recordings at a published rate, with ownership remaining in the hands of each family. The program was called Voices Brought Home. It gave Ethan steady work, kept the electricity on, and allowed Lily to finish homework at the same scarred table where her father had once hidden a final notice beneath his toolbox. The radio entered the museum only after Walter chose to place it there. Ethan repaired its failing power system but left every dent, scratch, and uneven patch of paint untouched. Beside it sat the 2 reels, the flight manifest, the old repair receipt, and the torn valuation form. Walter wrote the display caption himself. "Do not remember this because a general heard his own voice. Remember it because someone finally listened." On the first evening the exhibit opened, Sophie and Lily helped Ethan label a newly restored family cassette. Whitaker and Walter sat at opposite ends of a wooden bench, listening to young voices crackle through the speakers. Ethan closed his father's toolbox and rested his hand on the worn handle. It no longer looked like the burden of a struggling repairman. It looked like proof that careful hands could protect what louder people tried to erase. When the recording ended, no one rushed to fill the quiet. The old radio's amber light glowed against the glass, and in that gentle silence, dignity asked for nothing more than to be heard.